Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pulmonary disorder lecture. In this lecture, we're going to discuss some of the disorders of the lungs. And you may enjoy, this is a nice song. I like it very much. You may enjoy it at your convenience. And the lungs, it's so simple. Air goes in and out, and blood goes round and round. That's per John West. He's a physician. He's a chest physician, still practicing, I believe, in San Diego. So it's so simple. It's all about a perfect date between air and blood. That's the lungs. The perfect date. Air meets the blood. Oxygen meets the blood. If this date goes well, then the lungs is doing its function. If something happened and there was no communication, there was no exchange between air and blood, then there is a problem. Okay, let's see this question. The movement of gas and air into and out of the lungs is called what? Perfusion, ventilation, respiration, diffusion? Yes, it's called ventilation. So let's do more terms here. The term pulmonary means lung. Anything related to the lung is pulmonary. So the pulmonary artery, the artery leaving the right ventricle going to the lungs, is called pulmonary artery. The veins leaving the lungs going back to the left atrium are called pulmonary veins. The circulation of blood from the right ventricle of the heart to the lungs and back to the left side of the heart is called the pulmonary circulation, and so on. If you have an embolus in one of the pulmonary vessels, that's pulmonary embolism. Breathing and ventilation, these two terms are similar. Ventilation is just a $5 word for breathing. Both are air going in and out, air going in and out. Now, gas exchange, this is the major function of the lung. It's all about getting oxygen in, and by in, I mean into the blood, and getting carbon dioxide out. That's the whole idea of the lung. That's the lung function. Getting oxygen in. If the lung fails to get oxygen in, this is respiratory failure, and we call it hypoxemic respiratory failure, because in this case, there will be less oxygen in the arterial blood. On the other hand, if the lung fails to get carbon dioxide, sorry, that's out, not in. So the lung function is getting oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. If the lung fails to get carbon dioxide out, again, that's respiratory failure, and we call it ventilatory failure. Why? Because the major mechanism by which the lung can get carbon dioxide out is ventilation. And the physical principle that controls gas exchange is known as diffusion. I'm going to explain more about gas exchange in when I use the whiteboard in a minute. But let me first complete these terms. Perfusion. Perfusion means the amount of blood feeding an organ or part of the organ. So the amount of blood reaching one part of the organ is the perfusion going to this part. Now, the term respiration is not all of the above. Respiration is a very specific cellular term. Respiration occurs in the cell, and to be more precise, respiration occurs in the mitochondria of the cell. It's the process of oxidative phosphorylation that takes place in the mitochondria, where glucose is burned in presence of oxygen, and you get units of ATP energy. But we have been using respiration interchangeably with pulmonary, interchangeably with ventilation. Okay, let me talk more about gas exchange using the whiteboard. because, again, this is the major lung function. So deoxygenated blood returns to the right side of the heart via the inferior vena cava from the lower half of the body and the superior vena cava from the upper half of the body. And blood or venous blood will go first to the right atrium, and from the right atrium, it goes to the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle is gonna pump this venous blood to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Why do we call it pulmonary artery? Because an artery is a blood vessel that takes the blood away from the heart. I will always use the green color when it comes to the lungs, because this is the medical color of oxygen. And the functional unit of the lung is the alveolus, as we're gonna see. So this is the alveolus. Now, the pulmonary artery will keep branching into smaller arteries until we finally get to this pulmonary capillary that surrounds the alveoli. So all alveoli are surrounded by these pulmonary capillaries, and these pulmonary capillaries carry the venous blood, the deoxygenated blood coming from the right side of the heart. So here, the venous blood in the pulmonary capillary. Now the alveoli have the atmospheric air inside. The atmospheric air is 20% oxygen and 0.03% carbon dioxide, very tiny amount of carbon dioxide. Whereas the venous blood has little oxygen but is rich in carbon dioxide. So the venous blood is rich in carbon dioxide. And because of this, the venous blood has more carbon dioxide than the alveoli. So carbon dioxide will diffuse, and this is the physical process by which gas exchange occurs. Carbon dioxide will diffuse from the venous blood to the alveoli and then to the outside by exhalation. And the movement of air in or out of the lung, we call it ventilation. Therefore, ventilation is the major process by which we get rid of carbon dioxide. And by the same token, oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli to the pulmonary capillaries. And therefore, the blood in the pulmonary capillaries will start to be red and oxygenated. And this blood will return to the left side of the heart via 4 pulmonary veins. And again, we call them veins because they take blood back to the heart. They take blood back to the heart. So the pulmonary veins carry red blood, oxygenated blood, to the left side of the heart. So this is the major function of the lung. And when I say it's all about perfect date between, it's all about a perfect date between blood in the pulmonary capillaries and oxygen in the alveoli. We want oxygen to get into this pulmonary blood, and we want carbon dioxide to get out. This is the gas exchange. If the lung fails to get oxygen in, that's respiratory failure, hypoxemic type. If the lung fails to get carbon dioxide out, that's respiratory failure, ventilatory type. Okay, back to the PowerPoint slides. We have two types of airways. We have conducting airways and gas exchange airways. As their names imply, conducting airways do not share in gas exchange. They just serve as conduits through which air passes to the alveoli where gas exchange occurs. So conducting airways like the nasopharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the main bronchi, and their major branches. But the gas exchange airways occur only in the alveoli and the very, very terminal bronchioles, what we call alveolar ducts. And as you can see, the alveoli are arranged as bunches of grapes and surrounded all around by pulmonary capillaries. The bluish ones carrying the venous blood coming from the right side of the heart, and the reddish ones, they are taking the oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart. And there are also two circulations in the lungs. Pulmonary circulation, and this is the circulation that is concerned with gas exchange. The pulmonary circulation starts in the right ventricle, going to the lungs, and back to the left side of the heart, to the left atrium and left ventricle. So pulmonary, right ventricle, pulmonary, left atrium, left ventricle. Right ventricle, pulmonary, left atrium, left ventricle. That's the pulmonary circulation. When you have problems in the heart, like left ventricular failure, it's going to be reflected on the pulmonary circulation, and you're going to get pulmonary congestion. And also, when you have problem in the lungs causing the pulmonary vessels to be constricted, this will be reflected on the right side of the heart, and you're going to get pulmonary right-sided hypertrophy. Let me explain this, and I will also talk a little bit about the gas exchange airways and the alveoli using the whiteboard. So first, let me talk about the pulmonary circulation. Pulmonary circulation is the circulation between the right ventricle and that ejects blood through the pulmonary artery. And this blood will reach the alveoli in the lungs. So I'm just going to draw the alveolus because it represents the functional unit of the lung. And the blood gets oxygenated at the alveoli, and this oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium, and from the left atrium to the left ventricle. So these are the components of the pulmonary circulation. Now, and the pulmonary circulation, gas exchange in the pulmonary vessels. Now, problems in the left ventricle. If you have left ventricular failure, there will be back pressure affecting the left atrium, back pressure affecting the pulmonary vessels, and this back pressure is going to push water into the pulmonary alveoli. And the pulmonary alveoli will be filled with water. And this is the reason why you get the pulmonary congestive symptoms of heart failure, dyspnea, orthopnea, paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, and wet exertional cough. Now, when you have lung disease causing hypoxemia, like COPD, when you have lung disease causing hypoxemia. So COPD patients have low levels of oxygen in their blood. That's hypoxemia. In any condition of hypoxemia, you know how the lung reacts. The lung reacts by vasoconstriction, by constricting the pulmonary vessels. Think of it like someone who works somewhere and he is tired, he is sick. Do you think he's going to welcome more files to come to him to review? I'm tired, I'm sick, I cannot deal with that. You know what? I'm going to shut the door of my office and I'm not going to receive anyone. I do not want more work. I am tired. This is exactly the case when the lung has a disease that causes hypoxemia. The lung says, I am tired, I am sick, I don't want to receive more venous blood to oxygenate because I am sick. So the lung will shut the pulmonary vessels, will constrict the pulmonary vessels. So in lung diseases that cause hypoxemia, we get pulmonary vasoconstriction. So which side of the heart is going to suffer when the pulmonary vessels are constricted? When the pulmonary vessels are constricted, when the pulmonary vessels are narrowed, which part of the heart, which side of the heart will suffer? This will result in back pressure affecting the right ventricle. So now the right ventricle will have to do more effort to push blood against the constricted pulmonary vessels, against the increased resistance of the pulmonary circulation. By the way, this pulmonary vasoconstriction results in pulmonary hypertension, increased pressure in the pulmonary vessels, pulmonary hypertension. Now, exactly with essential hypertension, patients with essential hypertension have very thick left ventricle, and patients with pulmonary hypertension will develop very thick right ventricle, and the right ventricle will start to show hypertrophy. So you get right ventricular hypertrophy, and eventually you are going to get right ventricular failure. So it started as a lung disease, COPD, that eventually resulted in right ventricular hypertrophy and failure. We call this condition cor pulmonale. Cor means heart, pulmonale, lungs. So this is a cardiac condition that results from a lung disease. Cor pulmonale is the cardiac condition that results from a lung disease. Here, we'll get back to the PowerPoint now. Oh, yeah, I wanted to talk also about the structure of the alveoli a little bit. Now, the alveoli normally look like this. They are arranged in this pattern, like a bunch of grapes. And actually, this pattern increases the surface area available for gas exchange because the alveoli are surrounded with the blood vessels. So blood vessels run here all around the alveoli like this to be oxygenated. So this arrangement increases the surface area. And actually the surface area of the alveoli in the two lungs is almost the surface area of a tennis court. It's very huge surface area, available for gas exchange. In the disease emphysema, which is part of the two conditions that constitute COPD, emphysema and chronic bronchitis, in emphysema, we get destruction of the alveolar walls. So imagine when the walls of alveoli get destroyed. Destruction of the alveolar walls. So what's going to happen? This is what will happen. When the walls of the alveoli are destroyed, now instead of being bunch of grapes, the alveoli will become just big balloons. Tell me about the surface area now. What happened to the surface area? Great reduction in the surface area. So what was the surface area of a tennis court is now only the surface area of a table tennis. The table tennis table. So in emphysema, we get great reduction in the surface area available for gas exchange. That's why we get hypoxemia and hypercarbia, because of great reduction in the surface area. And there are other implications for that I will talk about in the next segment. Okay, so I think that will be enough for this segment, and we'll continue in the next one.